Okay, so I am here interviewing who I think is probably the most amazing journalist for women's basketball in this country and everything else you do. But I feel very honoured to be interviewing you today and just hearing your experiences in the sport and understanding what it's like from your perspective being involved in women's basketball. So Megan Hustwaite, welcome to She
Thank you, Loz. It's great to be here. And yes, it's a bit strange. What size shoe are you?
12 men.
Yeah, and 8 women. So the shoes on the other foot. But
12 and a half since I had kids actually. So
yeah, I've interviewed you a lot over the years and a lot in the last 12 months.
yeah.
So it's lovely to be here, and I'm a bit nervous.
Well, look, I thought it was only right that we get your experiences and your opinions and views of our sport because you know what's going on, you're around it, you interview people daily. And I think that nobody watches more basketball than what you do. So it's and then also too because you're working with us on She Hoops and writing Beyond the Baseline. So thank you very much for that.
No, thank you for having me. I'm enjoying it.
So I guess firstly, how did you learn to love women's basketball? What drew you to become such a great supporter of it?
Well, I grew up in Ballarat, so I wanted to be a sports journalist from the age of 8, and I had amazing role models who were from my hometown in Robin Ma and Alison Cook, who were playing for Australia, and I just remember being so excited that they were from where I was from, and we had a lot of great athletes from Ballarat and a lot of Olympians at that time, but even though I didn't want to be an athlete and was never going to be, I guess knowing that they came from where I came from and that they were succeeding and achieving their dreams on a world stage showed me that you didn't need to be from the city, and that if you had a goal and you're passionate and you're prepared to work hard, you could achieve it. So that's probably where it started, and then obviously watching Olympics and World Cups, but definitely watching the WNBL on the ABC on Saturday afternoons. So that was definitely the staple for me from when I was in primary school.
Yeah. And what sort of was your pathway then into becoming such a sort of well-known female basketball journo?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I wrote for our local paper in Ballarat, the Courier. They had a youth page that I used to contribute to, and then when I was in year 12, I'd actually take some time off school to go and work for them, which I was very lucky too, and because I'd had that taste, I didn't want to go to uni. I mean, I didn't want to go back to school, but I didn't want to go to uni. So I started in year 12 applying for cadetships, which is like a media version of an apprenticeship. So I was applying for them in country towns, but wasn't getting them because I hadn't finished school. So I'd get sort of rejection letters and I'd be devastated. And then I had an interview at the Wimmera Times newspaper up in Horsham in the Wimmera. Before exams, and then I got that job before I finished school, which was great. And I was going to be starting in February the following year, so I'd do my exams and have summer and all that kind of stuff. I was 17, but they called me a couple of weeks later and said, "Oh, we've had another journo leave, so we need you to start on Monday." But I hadn't finished school, so I finished my exams. Had my last exam on the Friday, and my parents moved me up to Horsham on the Friday night, and I began my full-time job on the Monday. So
wow, at 17.
Yeah, yeah. And so I remember writing about kids that, well, they weren't kids, that were my age, getting their VCE results, and I was also getting my VCE results. So I think, that's where it started, and a really strong basketball region up in the Wimmera. So, you know, covering a really strong, what was a Big B team, young players that had gone to college in America, and I guess that's where covering basketball really began.
What would you say to young kids that are aspiring to be journalists? Like young women that are aspiring to be journalists and follow your pathway, and then how did you get into the WNBL and how did you create those relationships to really start getting opportunities?
Yeah, I would say now with social media, everyone's got a platform. So there's lots of ways that you can be a journalist or a reporter or a content creator. So, or you can, write a blog or, contribute articles or start your own podcast, video content. Whereas, back in our day, I was long before even MySpace or Facebook. So I think it's a blank canvas for creation now, which is really great. WNBL, I was working at Leader Newspapers, which was a community masthead in Melbourne, which had something like 40 local newspapers across Melbourne, and I covered sport for 10 of them, and Bulleen Boomers were in one of those papers. So I started covering WNBL in 2008. Cheryl Chambers was coach of Bulleen, and she just had her daughter, who is now 15. So I just look at her daughter to see how long I've been covering the league. So that was fantastic, because we as a local newspaper needed the WNBL probably more than it needed the media, because we gave them great coverage every week in terms of match reports, pictures, feature stories on all the players, and not just the Bulleen players, but if you came to town to play for Canberra, Susie during her heyday, all those things were really big stories for us, and really promoting the local team. So I guess one of the highlights during my 10 years at Leader was covering Bulleen's first and only championship.
Yep.
And so that's where I, was dealing with someone like Robin Ma, who I looked up to on a daily basis, because she was the administrator of the club, and that's how I met Tom Ma and Timsy, and they were running the club, and obviously that team, had some champions, but then players, like Jenna O'Hay that would go on and captain the Opal. So that's probably where initially a lot of those relationships, which I still have now, began.
And then I guess over the years, what's really struck you about women's basketball in terms of, I guess, number one, resources, but like how it operates, like at different levels? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think from a bit of an outsider coming in, not that I played basketball, but I always have found women's basketball to be very welcoming. For me, I guess as a journalist, and at times, sometimes the only media covering the league or teams or players or stories. And I think a lot has changed in terms of resources, but then a lot hasn't too. So I think of when I first started covering the WNBL, and as I said, it was that local angle where we needed to cover it because we had pages to showcase the WNBL. And I look at the coverage, say, the WNBL gets now, and it doesn't have that because community media like that doesn't exist, but it hasn't improved in a lot of ways either. Like, we do have different mediums like podcasts and digital and that kind of thing, but in a lot of ways we haven't come that far in media coverage over that sort of 15-year period either.
Yeah. And what would you sort of attribute to that?
It's a great question, because I think it's a storm of things.
Yeah.
I know, last WNBL season, I had a full page WNBL column in News Corp papers, which was incredible, and it came about really quickly. It was just, do you want to write a full page? And I was like, is this a joke? Like, of course I do. But I guess the thing was, it was sponsored by KO, who were broadcasting us every WNBL game, and they wanted to invest in WNBL. So we're not with KO anymore, so we don't have that page, and that's a huge loss, because we were able to tell all sorts of stories through there. So I think advertising money, sponsorship, that leads to different things. So if you're on KO, you might have reach in a paper because News Corp, Foxtel, KO are all part of the same family. Right. In saying that, I wrote a lot of stories about your comeback this year for News Corp papers, and they were just a no-brainer. So as a freelancer, I pitched them, and it was like, yeah. And some of that is because of who you are. But I think if it's a good story, it will still get picked up. So Alex Bunton speaking about her domestic violence experience earlier this year, that was just a good story. It didn't matter who she was or who she played for or whatever.
Yeah.
They were interested in that. So I guess good stories are still good stories. It's just a matter of where you can pitch them and how that comes about.
Yeah. And so that's how you sort of do those. You pitch them to the newspapers and then they either pick them up or they don't.
Yeah, that's right.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So I guess you've covered cricket, you've covered football, AFLW, all sorts of sports. But why do you think that they get more coverage than what women's basketball does?
Yeah, it's a great question because women's basketball has something that all those sports don't have, and that is that they compete at the highest sporting level in the world, which is an Olympics. And, there's World Cups, of course, but we've had an extremely successful representation of Aussies in the WNBL, which is the highest level in the world. I was talking to someone about this the other day. They asked me about, why isn't women's basketball sort of held in the same esteem as, say, netball in this country. And I was sort of thinking back to Oz 94, Atlanta, and I can't remember, Robin Ma, Michelle Timms, Trish Fallon, Sandy, Shelley Gorman. They weren't household names at the time. Whereas I think if you look at that same era of netballers, Liz Alice, Sherelle McMahon, those kind of people were able to sort of capitalise on that and have sponsorships and do media and have continued through to this day with a lot of those things. Whereas I feel like maybe, and it was long before my time, I was just a kid, but maybe we didn't capitalise on that in the 90s, where we didn't have Robin Ma as the face of Uncle Toby's and things like that. And then I wonder whether that's kind of set the platform for the years to come, because even these days, Laura Geitz is a retired netballer. She still commentates, but she's face of Swiss and got all these different ambassadorships. We don't have the equivalent, like a Christy Harrower or a Laura Hodges, which is that same ilk, don't have that same profile or opportunity. So that saddens me, but I wonder whether it goes back to not capitalising on that initial success.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think because we probably have always been compared to netball, whether we like it or not, and sometimes it's hard, not to compare. But yeah, I feel like we probably didn't capitalise on promoting and advertising those women.
Yeah.
Back in that heyday, especially someone like Sandy, who is now the coach of Australia.
Yeah.
Imagine if she had the profile in Australia throughout that period.
Yeah, and I think it's hard too, because a lot of those players do go overseas and play, and they spent like Sandy and Timsy and I think Robbie, I'm not sure about Rob, but Shelley Gorman, they were playing in Europe for a long time as well, so they were out of the country for a long time, and then back for the WNBL. So that was, I think that was a lot like us as well. With Penny, myself, Suze, we all played over in Europe in the WNBA. I want to know some of your barriers and challenges, like things that you faced in your career, because obviously, nothing ever goes smoothly. But what are some of the things that have really sort of let you down in the past, and things that have lifted you up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess not basketball related, but when I started covering sport as a teenager up in Horsham and was sort of the first female to be covering the big country footy league up there, and I was young, so probably didn't understand the depths of what was happening, but on reflection now I understand how terrible it was, covering footy. Remember interviewing a coach in the rooms after the game and having water thrown over me by players, being spat on, being abused by football club presidents for just reporting on the facts, and I was a teenager, and I think I was just probably ignorance is bliss, and I was young and didn't know. But I look back now and I think, gosh, and I had great colleagues and an editor that supported me, but there was also a lot of people around those sporting clubs that saw it go on and didn't step in, and I was a young girl. I guess in the basketball community, like I said, it's been really welcoming, so establishing relationships with people throughout the game has led to wonderful things and wonderful opportunities. And you're one of those that I remember your agent Bruce giving me your number so I could call you for an interview when I was at Leader, and I wouldn't have thought that it would lead to the relationship working relationship we've had, from doing a story when you had your first baby to your comeback and everything in between. So I think you've got to get some runs on the board. So I think, once I got some runs on the board and, established and then really worked on those relationships, I think I really do try to nurture the relationships. And you see all sorts of things, along people's journeys. So I think people see them and value them and will come to you if they want to share a story. And it's led to all sorts of amazing experiences. And I guess that's also too because, we talk about not having a huge section of the media covering women's basketball. So I've probably been fortunate to have some of those opportunities. But I think if... and in saying that too, I have some relationships that aren't great, and I'm pretty stubborn. So if I feel that I've been mistreated, I will, I'll stand firm on that too. And that still goes on a little bit, but the good certainly outweighs the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's been so, for women's basketball, I remember when I first started with the WNBL, like you were literally the first person I called because we just were so under-resourced. At that point, I don't think we had a marketing department. It just, people were in and out. And it
seems a long time ago, doesn't it?
It does seem like a long time ago. But, for me, in my role at Basketball Australia, in all my roles at BA, I feel like you've been one of the first people I've called to be like, I need your help on this. Let's do this together. Let's try and... so I really appreciate like that accessibility, firstly, but the fact that you are so supportive of our sport. I guess what have you seen? I mean, like you talked about before that lots has changed, but a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed as well.
Yeah.
Like what sort of things haven't changed? I mean, other than the media side of it.
Yeah. I still think in so many ways we can tell the stories of our players and clubs better, and that's just not the external media, but it's clubs, and I understand not all clubs have the same resources, but going back to what we were saying earlier, everyone has a phone and social media, and I honestly believe that's a blank canvas. So I think within the WNBL, I'm really enjoying some of the new-ish content that some of the clubs are producing, but we've just got amazing stories in every club around the league. So I think we owe the players, everyone owes the players to do better, and that's telling their stories, getting more sponsorship, getting them into the community, because I feel like it's sort of the WNBL or just women's basketball in this country is like this great untapped resource.
Yeah.
So I just want more people to know about how great they are. So I think we can all do better storytelling, and you don't need to be a journalist or a media professional to do that. But we've all got contacts in different industries. So I think we need to just open our minds a bit about, what we can do to help showcase our amazing athletes.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about how important it is to build relationships with people, like whether it is with the athletes, whether it's with governing bodies, clubs. Like, how important is it to really establish and build and then develop those relationships?
Yeah, it definitely, relationships is everything, especially when I call myself an unrestricted free agent. So I effectively work for myself. I'm not employed by anyone. So I contract and freelance for different people. I've done a lot of work for the WNBL and Basketball Australia, but then also for News Corp as well. They're super important, and some of them go back to my initial days 15 years ago in women's basketball, and some of them are new. And it's probably easier now establishing new relationships because people are generally very lovely and do say nice things about you and the way that you work and the work you produce. So that always helps when you've got new people and they hear that kind of gets things off on a good start. But yeah, it's super important. And, at times it's been a bit delicate because I might be writing for News Corp, but also doing work for BA or WNBL. So, I understand that position, and sometimes when you're frustrated with things, you mightn't voice that like other people do, or you just have to understand what those relationships are and what they mean.
Yeah.
But I think people don't forget those relationships and also how you made them feel. So I always try, regardless of whether it's an interview after a game, you know, on broadcast, or it's a interview for a written story and it's, you know, same thing, a bit of a match report, or it might be someone opening up about something deeply personal. I think people remember their interactions with you. So I always try to make it enjoyable for them, and hopefully they feel comfortable, and yeah, they remember that. Because I think sharing people, like being interviewed, I interview people all day, every day, but some people have never been interviewed before, or they're opening up about something that, you know, being really vulnerable, really honest. So yeah, no matter what the topic is, I just want to create a safe space, and that they get off the phone and feel like they're content and glad they shared that story. And you just never know where that relationship will lead to.
Yep, it's true. And I think you'll get more out of people as well, having that sort of approach rather than a real, like, I have a story from, you know, back when I started, like I was really, really young, and there was some people that covered women's basketball solely in those years. That was in the 90s, and oh my God. And I mean, this is before social media and before, but I just found them very, quite hard to deal with, purely because I don't think there was many more people covering women's basketball at that time. So it was quite intrusive, and I felt pressured a lot. Whereas when I met you, and the relationship that I built with you, and like being interviewed by you, and I feel very safe in that environment. So I really respect that about you. So thank you very much.
That's nice to hear. And just, you know, talking about like that safe space, I actually interviewed Nat Hurst yesterday about her very quick journey to head coaching, and she was talking about how she's making a lot of mistakes, but she told her players at the start of the season, like, hey, this is my first go at it. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. You guys are going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes together. And I think that's something that Adelaide players have really taken on. And I just thought it was so honest, because I think you put ego aside when you admit something like that. And then you don't know what effect someone reading that story might feel a bit more comfortable in themselves and feel okay about making mistakes too. So I think like that's nice to hear that you create a safe space, because I'd hate someone to do an interview with me and just feel yuck about the experience. So
I mean, obviously She Hoops is you know, a platform designed to help women get through the pathways, educate, communicate, and just connect people. What do you see, like, who have been your mentors, women that you have looked up to, and then what's your take on women supporting women?
I am huge for women supporting women. I feel really fortunate that I've received that support from women in basketball back in spades. So Leanne Grantham, Jan Morris, Lorraine Landon, people that really were at the top of their game before my time, but are incredible supporters of me. And then I guess past players who have now moved into admin roles, like Lucille Bailey, Tracy Browning, have just given me so much support. You know, you're one of those two laws, and it's really huge, because I think women may start off in a particular role in basketball and then can move around into coaching, admin, media, which is great, and I think we need to support more women moving around, but that support can be so important. And it's been important for me in challenging times when I've had disappointments, and you know, I've had a few disappointments this year in not reaching some of my basketball goals. And you know, those women that I've mentioned have really supported me, have, you know, come to events I've been involved in to support me, and that's really meaningful, because they don't know me anything. So I think that's huge. And I think just remembering that we're all in this sport together, regardless of whether it's media, administrators, refs, players, coaches. And I think it's like, I really do think when women work together and support each other, we can rise and achieve our best. Like, we can soar. So yeah, it gives you confidence to just focus on the job at hand. So I'm really grateful for the support that I, receive from all factors of the game.
Yeah. I sort of see you as a leader in our sport, like in terms of the media and what you do, like we talked about. I think in terms of just consistency and the fact that you're constantly driving women's basketball in this country. What do you see that leadership is? Is that a constant push? Like, is it like, what is that, do you think?
I think it's a constant push. I think it's, again, I've talked a lot about social media and how we all have our own platforms. So it's whether I have, the exclusive with you about your comeback in the national papers, or it's resharing content on Instagram to my followers, or putting, information on Twitter for people to consume. So, and it's doing, I guess it's just doing the work. It's, if I'm asked to do radio interviews, I always do them. I never say no to promoting women's basketball, going on podcasts, whatever it is. And it's not about it being paid or unpaid. I see everything as an opportunity to elevate those women and those stories. So I think, like promoting, and I guess that's my way of leading, hopefully.
And what do you see? What are some examples of great leaders in our sport? Do you like, what from your perspective? What do you see? What are they? What are those qualities?
Oh, I love that question. That's great. I think it's women being authentic and valuing the women around them. And using their voice and their space and their own platform to elevate themselves, each other, and messages. So I think we're so lucky. I think we're in a great era of women's basketball in Australia, where we've got Sandy Brondello coaching in the WNBL. We've got Jackie Dover as a referee, really forging the path. We've got amazing players. We've got amazing administrators. Lorraine Landon's being inducted to the Basketball New South Wales Hall of Fame, elevated as a legend, this weekend, and she's just come off another World Cup. And we've got, dedicated volunteers, and that's the high end, but you can walk into any basketball stadium for local basketball, rep, NBL 1, and you can see women doing all of those things at every level. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, the pathways are definitely there. Yeah. So I guess lastly, obviously there is this push for gender equality in sport, where there's a focus on really creating a community and a safe place for women in sport too. But how do you see women driving change in our sport at the moment? Is that something that you can actively see, or is it something that you think needs a little bit more work?
Both. I think, what you're doing with She Hoops is a huge thing, because you've built a platform, and there's so much on She Hoops. Like, it's a free resource. It's like a one-stop shop. And you've got access, obviously, to the best of the best in all facets of the game around the world. But I can imagine that it's a really comforting, safe place for women that are doing the work and the hard yards at the grassroots local level. And sometimes, they are one out doing it all and, copying all the and don't have a lot of support. So I think not only can they go to somewhere like She Hoops to get that support, but they can connect with other women that, they may not know or have known of otherwise. And I think, if someone reaches out to you and wants some advice or just some support, that's a nice feeling. And no one's ever going to say no.
Yeah.
And say, nah, sorry, I'm not giving you the time of day. So I think just it's a very raw and honest place. And I think that's something we really needed, because, women can be their worst enemies too. As much as women support women can be so bitchy and competitive and cruel.
Yeah.
So I think just opening up a platform like this and sort of setting the tone of no, this is what this community is going to be like, that's creating change.
Yeah. We're here to support and we're here to connect.
Yep.
Megs, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Look, as always, you're a dream come true for me. I think you are.
Oh my God.
But no, we really appreciate the work and everything that you do for women's basketball. And yes, I'll be calling on you probably once a fortnight. More interviews, please. No, but thank you. Thank you for everything, and your insights have been incredible.
Thanks, Liz. It's been so nice to chat to you, and congrats on She Hoops. And it's
Thank you.
it's an honour to contribute to this space, and may she keep growing.
She will keep growing. She's very exciting, that's for sure.
You finally got a baby girl.
I got a baby girl. I did. That's very good with words. You are. That's why you're a journo.